Lieutenant Commander Stephen L. Johnson faced a serious dilemma when his submarine, the Segundo, detected a large radar contact moving south toward Tokyo, about 100 miles off the coast of Honshu, one of Japan's home islands. The ceasefire had entered its 14th day, and the Pacific theater of World War II had just concluded. Though many days remained until the formal peace signing on September 2, 1945, aboard the battleship USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, tensions were still high. As Johnson approached the unknown vessel, he soon realized it was a massive submarine, so large it initially resembled a surface ship in the darkness. Since the United States didn't possess any submarines of that size, he concluded it must be Japanese. For the 29-year-old commander, it was a critical moment. Before him was the largest and most advanced submarine ever built. The Japanese I-401 measured longer than a football field and displaced 5,233 tons on the surface, over 3 times the weight of Johnson's Segundo. Its armament was equally intimidating, with a 5.5-inch cannon on its aft deck, 3 triple-barrel 25mm anti-aircraft guns, a single 25mm gun on the bridge, and 8 large torpedo tubes at the bow. Although the giant submarine flew a black surrender flag, it moved swiftly through the night, and Johnson's crew became increasingly uneasy, especially as the Japanese vessel continued to display the rising sun banner. At daylight, Johnson finally slowed it down and aimed his torpedo tubes at it, resulting in a tense standoff. He realized the vessel before him was a potential scientific treasure, one that could not only benefit U.S. research, but also advance his own career. He and his men had permission to sink the Japanese submarine if necessary. The situation now depended entirely on the decisions of this young American officer and his elusive adversary in Japanese waters. Unbeknownst to Johnson, the submarine was the I-400, commanded by pilot Commander Tatsunosuke Ariazumi. Ariazumi had designed the secretive submarine with the intention of launching surprise attacks on the U.S. mainland. The I-400 was part of a special squadron of underwater aircraft carriers. Known as the father of the I-400 series, Ariazumi had built a reputation in the Japanese Navy and remained fiercely loyal to the emperor, making surrender a deeply shameful act for him. Johnson also had to deal with the I-401's captain, Lieutenant Commander Nobukio Nambu, whose combat experience stretched back to the Pearl Harbor attack. Nambu now commanded the world's largest submarine, which housed 3 advanced attack aircraft in a hangar built atop the vessel. The submarine had originally been designed for another Pearl Harbor-style assault, or even an attack on major American cities like New York or Washington, D.C. The II-400 class submarines were full of engineering surprises. They carried specially designed Siran aircraft that could be launched at sea and could reach speeds of 19 knots, or about 22 miles per hour, while remaining on patrol for 4 months, twice as long as submarines like the Segundo. They could circle the globe 1.5 times without refueling. Though Emperor Hirohito had declared Japan's surrender on August 15th, neither Commander Ariazumi nor Nambu had initially accepted it. One of the most confusing post-surrender orders was Tokyo Communique 114, which confirmed peace, but still instructed submarines to carry out their missions and attack the enemy. The I-400 series was born just 3 weeks after the attack on Pearl Harbor, on the orders of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Japan's naval strategy. Yamamoto, who had visited the U.S. before the war, warned against prolonged conflict with such an industrial powerhouse. He later died when American aircraft shot down his plane. Yamamoto believed submarine-launched attacks on American cities would demoralize the U.S. population and hasten a peace deal. Though the Japanese had used float planes on submarines before, these were mostly for reconnaissance and were easily shot down by American fighters. There were never enough planes to influence American decision-making. Known for his strategic thinking, Yamamoto envisioned a submarine capable of traveling 40,000 nautical miles without refueling, more than 4 times the range of a U.S. Balao-class submarine like the Segundo. The I-400 class could carry 1,750 tons of fuel, food for a crew of 147 to 157 men, and 2 specially built attack planes that could fly 600 miles at speeds of 220 miles per hour. The hangar atop the submarine had to be at least 100 feet long to hold the aircraft. The structure had to be strong enough to handle both deep-sea pressure and aerial attacks once surfaced. Yamamoto's Y-400 submarines were the size of small cruisers, measuring over 400 feet in length. When submerged, they displaced about 6,560 tons, roughly 3 times the size of the largest American submarines. In fact, they were bigger than some destroyers. One observer said it wasn't an exaggeration to claim Yamamoto was essentially asking for a small underwater aircraft carrier. He ordered the construction of 18 massive submarines, each capable of carrying 2 attack planes, totaling 36 aircraft. The concept made its way through Japan's traditionally slow naval bureaucracy by June 1942, and work on the first 5 submarines was scheduled to begin in January 1943. The special class of submarines was eventually named Sentoku. To fit planes inside the submarine's top-mounted hangar, a complete redesign of the aircraft was necessary. Speed, range, and bomb load had to be balanced carefully, and the wings had to be foldable. The job of designing, testing, and building the aircraft was given to the Aichi Aircraft Company. To improve performance, the plane's floats were removed. After missions, the crew was expected to circle back and be picked up by the submarine. Each aircraft had a pilot, navigator, tail gunner, radio man, and bombardier. The initial armament plan included a fixed forward-facing 7.7mm machine gun and a rear-facing belt-fed 13mm cannon with a 300-round capacity. The I-400 program faced criticism due to Japan's slow-moving naval bureaucracy. Following the loss at the Battle of Midway in June 1942, Japan shifted its focus from attacking the U.S. mainland to defending its own territory. Yamamoto died in April 1943 at the age of 59, solidifying the influence of other naval leaders. The I-400 class submarines were redesigned to carry 3 attack bombers, and the smaller I-13 and I-14 submarines would each carry an additional aircraft. However, the total number of submarines to be built was reduced. Japanese naval leaders realized that the loss of the Panama Canal could severely disrupt the American war effort. Instead of targeting cities like New York or Washington, they decided the canal would be a more strategic target. Destroying it could delay American reinforcements and give Japan time to strengthen its defenses. The first test flight of the Aichi-built attack aircraft, named Seiran, meaning storm from a clear sky, took place on November 8, 1943. The test was successful and marked a promising start for the submarine-borne bomber. The Japanese began collecting intelligence on the Panama Canal's defenses. Their analysis showed that destroying the locks could cause a major flood, sending water from Gatun Lake rushing to the Caribbean and damaging more locks along the way. Around 40,000 American troops guarded the canal. The approaches were mined, and strongholds were established at Colon, Margarita Island, Toro Point, and Fort Sherman, which was armed with a 16-inch gun with a 25-mile range. Radar stations, searchlights, anti-aircraft batteries, 9 air bases, and 30 warning stations further fortified the area. After careful planning, the Japanese developed a strategy to attack the Gatun locks at sunrise, when defenses might be lower and the gates closed. Bombs and torpedoes would be used during the dry season, when Gatun Lake's water would take longer to replenish. Initially, the mission was not meant to be a suicide attack. Pilots would return to the submarines and wait for recovery. The defense plan began in early 1945 after nearly a year of preparation. However, problems surfaced. None of the submarines had been completed, and the planes were not in full production due to an American blockade. Japan's steel shortage led to a decision to build only 5 I-400 submarines. Yet planning continued, revealing how determined Japan was to destroy the canal and slow down American advances. Japanese leaders believed that if the canal was lost, the Allies might reconsider their demand for Japan's unconditional surrender. Despite all obstacles, Japan pushed ahead with finishing the I-400 and the smaller Y-13, both handed over to the Navy by the end of 1944. The I-401 entered service in January 1945, followed by the I-14 in mid-March 1945. Testing of the Submarine aircraft was still ongoing into late 1944, and due to labor shortages, much of the assembly work was done by schoolgirls aged 12 to 15. The Japanese carried on despite 2 earthquakes, engine problems, and American air raids that disrupted production. During this period, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa proposed another use for the Sentoku submarines, deploying biological weapons. He suggested using the Submarine aircraft to carry biological agents and attack densely populated areas along the U.S. West Coast. Dr. Shiro Ishii, head of Japan's infamous Unit 731 and an expert on biological warfare, was consulted. He recommended targeting San Francisco, Los Angeles, or San Diego, and proposed releasing plague-infected fleas from the planes over the cities. He had successfully used it in China in late March, but the Army's General Staff Chief put the plan on hold, calling it unpardonable on humanitarian grounds. In essence, the Japanese Army, which had developed biological weapons and tested them on American and Chinese prisoners, opposed using the weapons on American civilians during the closing stages of the war. This was presumably because they believed the war was already lost. The relentless American attacks had come at a cost. By early 1945, the Japanese had only 20 modern submarines left, including those from the Soku Squadron. Problems began as the 2 available I-400 subs started test launching their Submarine planes. Each submarine was expected to surface and launch its 3 planes within 30 minutes, but in training, it took almost 45 minutes. Those extra 15 minutes could mean the difference between life and death for both crew and pilots. They also struggled to get the aircraft engines running on time, and fuel supplies for the submarines and Submarine planes were very limited. The increasing threat from mines made operations more difficult, and as the sense of urgency grew, the Japanese made several changes to their plans. Torpedo attacks were ruled out since the pilots lacked proper training. Instead, each of the 10 aircraft assigned to the Panama Canal mission was to carry a 1,760-pound bomb, the largest in the Navy's arsenal, similar to the one that sank the USS Arizona at Pearl Harbor. The plan was for the low-flying planes to crash into the canal locks, ensuring the mission's success. This meant the pilots were effectively on suicide missions. Silently, they accepted their fate. The departure was scheduled for mid-June. With additional instruction, the crews managed to launch the first 2 planes in about 4 minutes each. The third was launched in 20 minutes after a small hiccup, keeping the total launch time just under 30 minutes. The planes surfaced and floated in enemy waters under intense observation for what felt like an eternity. The Submarine pilots practiced bombing runs against a life-size mock-up of the canal gates in Nanao Bay. They already understood what was at stake. The real attack would involve low, fast flight without floats, and with live bombs securely strapped to their aircraft. Debugging the planes was a challenge. 9 soldiers had been killed in accidents, and 1 died in a separate incident involving a non-flying aircraft. Training on the I-14 was especially difficult, as it was the newest of the 4 Sentoku subs and had the least experienced crew. The surrender of Iwo Jima in March 1945 and the American assault on Okinawa heightened Japanese concerns as the Americans drew closer to the home islands. Because the conflict had moved faster than expected, the attack on the Panama Canal was canceled. There was brief discussion of surprise attacks on Los Angeles or San Francisco, But those plans were also put on hold in favor of attacking American carriers at Ulithi, a major staging base in the Carolines near Truk. The two large submarines were to approach Ulithi separately in mid-August, rendezvous near the target, and launch the attack. The I-14 and I-13 were supposed to fly to Japanese-held Truk, launch their planes, and confirm the presence of American ships at Ulithi. The I-13 was presumed lost as it never reached Truk. The I-14 arrived on August 4th and flew a reconnaissance mission over Ulithi the next day. Soon after, the crew learned that an atomic bomb had destroyed Hiroshima. And on August 15th, the Emperor issued a message requesting that all forces lay down their arms. Uncertainty surrounded later orders from home. One message instructed all submarine captains to continue with their missions. Then on August 16th, just hours before the R-401 was to launch its planes, a direct order was received to cancel the Ulithi attack. Commander Arazumi, who led the mission, took his own life aboard the I-401. His crew quietly buried him at sea before encountering the Americans. The submarines, including I-401 and its sister subs, followed orders to raise the black flag of surrender and disarm. The planes were thrown overboard, and documents like log books and code books were stuffed into weighted sacks and tossed into the sea. One torpedo accidentally detonated, circled back toward the sub, made noise, and vanished. When the submarines returned to Tokyo Bay, they drew a lot of interest from the Americans. Many initially believed the large hangars were used to transport supplies to distant island troops, despite the visible catapults. The Japanese crews cooperated in helping the Americans understand how the strange boats operated. By the end of September, the Americans had begun taking trips aboard the submarines, though none were taken underwater. The vessels were eventually sent to Hawaii for further study. After collecting as much information as possible, the U.S. Navy deliberately sank all three submarines by early June 1946 to keep them out of Soviet hands. One of the subs made it to the United States after the war and was later restored at an estimated cost of $1 million. It is now on display at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. While the Navy generally overlooked the massive submarines, it did take a keen interest in the sound-absorbing coatings used on them. The I-400 class submarines were undoubtedly the strategic forerunners of today's ballistic missile submarines. The Regulus missile program, which began about a decade after the war and was designed to carry nuclear warheads beneath waterproof deck hangars, is a direct descendant of these subs. In a way, the United States won the Cold War thanks to a new and improved version of Yamamoto's vision. Phil Zimmer, a former newspaper reporter and American Army veteran, writes about World War II topics from Jamestown, New York.